Okay, so Roel and I are going to tag team this. So we were charged with synthesizing and trying to sketch out the roadmap for what we're going to do. And I started thinking about this, and I looked at some schematics and flight paths and stuff of rockets, and I've never been on a spaceship, and so we just felt we needed a more simple analogy. And so, going to the moon is a journey, it's a trip, not much different than a road trip, across the United States or across Europe or any other continent. That is a hybrid vehicle there. And so we wanted to kind of go through with some examples of things that we thought would help summarize some of these things.
Right, so we were thinking about describing the roadmap to you, and we thought we would make it a little bit more personal and relatable. So we were talking about our last road trips that we took, and this is how my last road trip ended in my old van with a refurbished engine, to be very clear. So we decided to go with Gary's road trip. And so when you go on a road trip, and we all have been there, and this is basically describing about 15 years ago when Gary and his family decided to take a road trip to Kennedy Space Center. And the launch at that time was actually to go to the International Space Station. So to come back to the first session here, that was actually the goal. But when we actually do a road trip, we have to think about that we need to prepare ourselves for this trip. And that's what we actually have been doing in these last days, preparing for ourselves for, okay, what is that trip that we want to take together? Then we have to think, okay, who do we need on that road trip? Who are not the passengers, but who are the active people within the van that also can perhaps drive and take over, give guidance of where to go? And that's actually the other point that we wanted to do during these few days, is actually identify who do we actually need to go on this road trip. And that was the second thing that I really got from this meeting, seeing that we already have a lot of people involved, but also seeing that sometimes we were missing people or felt that we need to strengthen certain things. And that's really the key message that we now have to think about. Of course, when you go on a road trip, you would need a vehicle. You would actually need to have the technology to actually get you to A to B. And that's exactly here what we have been talking about. What is actually that vehicle that we want to use, that we can use, and how can we all contribute basically with our knowledge to that vehicle to actually make that road trip? And of course, when you go, you have to be prepared to actually take that road trip, and so it has to be properly serviced. So what we actually do with that vehicle need to be actually fit for purpose. And so we had this morning discussions about, I think it's then QAQ or QAQC, or things that we actually need to do so that we actually know that what we get is interpretable and is actionable. We then had to make sure that we have the supplies to take this road trip. And again, that is all of us thinking about what do we need to actually make that trip, and what can we contribute, all of us, to that road trip. We need gas to go, or electricity, and that means basically we need momentum, which I think we are creating. We are responsible for doing that. But we also need fuel, which might be funding partnerships that actually make sure that we actually can take this road trip. And we have talked about that as well. Then we have to plan for this road trip. So this is really what we did in the last few days, is to think, okay, where is this trip taking us? What is the goal that we want to have? And so again, the planning for this road trip. And you need to know your destination. That's exactly what we talked about. What is that then? And when Gary went on a road trip, and then Gary can take over, this was pre-GPS time. So Gary needed an atlas, and he's going to talk about his personal experience on taking the road trip.
So we did decide to take all of our kids on this trip when we were selecting passengers. And we made it to the Kennedy Space Center. And often when they're doing these things, there's delays and stuff. So actually getting there and being there at the right time for this. And so we got to see Discovery take off. And I went back and found my own photographs of this launch. And it was just a big orb that just burned out the camera. And it kind of noticed to me that you have to have the right measuring equipment for some of these things. And so the idea is NASA has their fancy cameras, they get these beautiful pictures, but it was a really great thing to see this happen. It was louder than I could have imagined, brighter. It was just really a great experience for our family. But one of the best parts of it was like recording that history and thinking about the memories of the trip and reflecting back on it and sharing it with others. You know, we took a lot of photos. You had the sights, the sounds, the smells. You might keep some sort of travel diary, whatever it would be. But each of those people on the journey have different recollections and impressions of it. So again, this was 15 years ago. My wife and our 6 kids, we got to see the Hubble movie. It had just come out on IMAX, like before the launch. We got to see that, so it was really great. So it was. But the idea is that we did learn a lot about it, and we all go back and look at it, but it was very much a very multi-century experience to do this. And I think the correlates to the exposome are very strong.
So when you go on a trip, you basically have perhaps a single map, but a single map is really not going to do it. And I think this was really articulated very well also this morning and in the past few days, that the map that we use can actually be different maps. They have to be adaptable for the local circumstances. So we actually do not need a one map, we actually need an atlas. And why are atlases really helpful? And that is because atlases have a harmonized, next one, language, symbols and conventions. We actually have an ontology on the map that actually tells us what is what on a map, where might there be a roadblock or a gas station and so on. It has navigation. It actually shows us in which direction are we going to go on that map. And it has scale so that things become comparable, that we actually have interoperability between these maps within the atlas. And the analogy is, again, very, very similar to the exposome, that what we need here is atlases that are interoperable. There might not be one map, but actually that collection is what moves us forward. But what is important there is to think about that we need these guided principles that actually help us to get there. So if we get there, and that's what the first point, we need to establish those principles, guidelines, and governance structures. That's what we need, and that's what we discussed about. And I think that is what we need to discuss more when we move forward. What we said also for an exposome roadmap, we need to set that destination, what that is, what that we want to achieve. And destinations can be multiple destinations. If you go on a road trip, you can say, okay, I want to actually get to Atlanta, but your first stop, and this is where my geography of the US is going to hamper me, there might be stops in between, and that might be your first destination. So let's think also what is the first destination that we want to reach, and what are the elements that we want to have at that time within that roadmap. When we go, we need to make sure that we have enough resources to start this off, because we have to start this off in the right way. And I think what we learned in these last days is that we already have many of these resources there. We often don't know where they are. So this is really the conversation that we have to have and see how we actually can bring that all together. Of course, there will be detours, there will be things that we have to refuel and adapt when you're on the road trip, because there might be unexpected things that happen. So we cannot plan for a roadmap and say this is what we're really going to do in the end. We have to have this continuous conversation with all of us when we actually get to the next destination. What is the next one? How can we actually get there? And we need evidence that we are making progress. So if your children in the car are asking, are we almost there? You want to know where you are. And so we need mile markers on the way to say, okay, this is where we want to get. Now we are here, and that's where we go to the next one. And you have been defining those mile markers yesterday by actually putting concrete ideas, what you want to be in 2 years, what you want to be in 3 to 8, or after 8 years. And so again, we need to elaborate that more. We started this process, and we need to actually fuel that more.
So I think a key part of this is the accountability that we have as a group. And if you can't measure something, you don't have metrics, it's very hard to do that. We have KPIs, these key performance indicators that have been highlighted by Taylor and Drucker. I'm actually a bigger fan of the objectives and key results, the OKR framework. And so this is the one that Andy Grove at Intel started, and that when Google was founded, they heavily adopt this framework. And so if you recall Prashant Shah from the other day, he's at Intel. And I remember I met with him because we're on an advisory board together. And I asked him about this. He's like, oh yeah, we use them all the time. He's like, everyone's desks has them posted up, like what their objectives and key results so everyone can see them. He's like, I make my kids do it. So like the OKRs that were developed at Intel have like gone all the way down in this way. But the idea is you have these key milestones and metrics that are definable and falsifiable, right? The idea is if you don't make it, you can say we didn't achieve that. So there's different frameworks we can use, and I think it's something, again, from a governance structure and input, we need time to develop the right way of doing this for our purpose. But again, there's no perfect framework, but we need to be clear on the principles and work collaboratively to work on these things.
So we had a lot of discussion on how do we measure success? And when we are on a road trip, we could think about the kilometers that we actually have traveled or miles that we have traveled, or we can talk about the destinations that we reached. And if you translate that into the things that we're thinking about the exposome, we could think about, okay, is a measure of success that we actually can define of the 5,000 ubiquitous chemicals, we can measure 5, 10, or 25% reliably. And that might be basically an analogy to the kilometers traveled, and that might be a reachable goal destination that we actually can define. And there are many, many more across the different components of the exposome. And the same can be said for geospatial or social determinants of health. Can we actually say, okay, we want to be able to, for the major ones that we actually can do, to have 50% of those operationalized at a quality and resolution that we actually agree on. And these are really things that we can define. You could also define it on the destination, and that was brought up as well in discussion about diminishing returns. And that is also, I think, where also Argentieri's paper is really important, where you could also say, no, I want to be able to explain X% more of the disease, your destination, if you want to put it in those terms. Those could also be KPIs that we actually can formulate together. So I just want to inspire you to think about, okay, how do we now formulate what we actually would call success, and what are the milestones or the mileposts that we actually can define to actually see that we're making progress.
So I think we start thinking about this roadmap, we need to commit to start the trip. And I think that's what we're here to talk about as a group. And again, understanding there's going to be bumps along the way that we have to adjust to. So as we've been trying to do, inviting many people in to bring their ideas, expertise, talents, that's what we've had here. I think if we go back in time, we've been involved in many meetings over the past decade or more where we've been doing this process, but I think we're really at a key moment now. We have to really figure out what the best tools are now. This was something I remember talking to Chris Austin a few years ago, was director of NCATS, about how, like on the Human Genome Project, they started with the tools they had at that time. They knew they weren't going to be good enough, but they had to start. And so the idea is, what's the best thing we have now? We get going, but we still want to make improvements as things go forward. We have to inventory the existing resources, who are the people, the funding that's available, and then work on these short, mid, and long-term resources. And I think developing the data structure, which is so critical to harmonizing the information, will be really critical. This quote from the Apollo missions was that their mantra was that failure was acceptable, but incompetence wasn't. The idea is that it's okay if we don't achieve something or if something doesn't work, but we have to make sure we're doing this with a high level of rigor and reproducibility, and just really making sure the science we're doing is very sound. And so as we started going through this, I was overwhelmed looking through all of these documents these groups generated over the last couple days. I'm not going to read through these, but again, people work together to develop these near-term, mid-term, and long-term goals and milestones. There were extensive parts in the different aspects of it on the enabling technologies, and we saw, again, many different groups, and we're working to distill these. And so again, we had the comments on the governance and the kind of goals in there. And because you entered these things into a system, we now have all these in front of us. But there's like dozens and dozens of pages, and I was going through it. I was like overwhelmed last night, is that it's going to take us time to make sure we collect and document these in a way that preserves all of your input. We're not just filing these away. Like, we actually want to go through these things in a systematic way and make sure we're capturing all that information. So I ask for your patience as we go through, because it will take the team a while to go through and do that. And I think the idea is to continue the collaboration, sending out updated versions of it, and asking for your feedback as we go forward. So again, I thank everyone for all the work they put into these, because there was a lot of creativity and work during that time. Michelle was reminding me about all of our journeys. Like, it's not a straight line, right? Like, you have to take the roads that are available, and you have to be ready for the different things that can occur along the way. So again, like, this idea that it's not going to be a straight line sort of roadmap for us, we really have to be thinking about the realities of what we face, what the funding challenges are, but we're committing to doing this as a group, and I think that will really help us lead to success. And so this is just one example of a roadmap, just a cartoon sort of thing, and there's filler in there, but the idea is that we're going to have multiple maps. Different components and pillars that we talked about will have things sketched out, and they'll have their own milestones. And that's why it will become an atlas, because some of the geospatial part will be some aspect of it. People work on social determinants will be another one, and the mass spec will be another one. But they should all be in that book, that atlas that holds all those together. But as you flip through it, you should have the same language that goes throughout it. And so even like with the roadmap, we might have version 1.0, 1.1, 2.0. And if we start a Human Exposome Project, if that's the right thing to do, there might be the version 1.0 or 2.0. And so it's not like when we come up with this roadmap, it has to be perfect at the start. It just has to be as good as we can make it at this point in time.
And so the idea of these multiple maps is that there might also be multiple roadmaps. And I think that's the other thing that we learned from these discussions here, is that we really have to think about the application area. For what are we really doing this? What do we want to achieve? And I just put in a picture of the STOA report for the European Parliament, where we said, okay, you can think about, okay, how can we contribute to chemical safety? How can we actually contribute to climate, which came back a lot of times in the discussion here? How can this actually help in child health? How can this actually help in career or occupational exposures? How can this actually help in clinical practice? And so we can think about these different things. How can we actually use this technology to give citizens more agency around the experiences that they have? And how can we actually use these kind of insights to lead to more healthy cities? And so we're termed this the 7 C's, so for you to remember this more easily. But there are these different roadmaps. We also have to think, and I already said that we need to think about that we have this hierarchy, or not a hierarchy, we have these different levels of roadmaps where, sometimes we have something that we can do at the global scale that helps us to get that global inference, but there are really things that are really very much locally determined, and we have to have those local roadmaps as well. And these different roadmaps might actually progress in different speeds. It's not that everything can move in the same speed, because that depends on where we are, what technology we have, and what resources are there. But the main thing is that they have to have the same guiding principles, the same goals, and if we do that, then they become actually linkable, and then we have that atlas that actually is able to actually learn from each other, and that's, I think, the message here. So I think we all have decided to take this journey, or at least I think you're all convinced and inspired during these days to get on board and to start. This is Gary's lovely van with the different mills. I just now see your added to this picture, thanks. But this van is clearly too small, right? So we're going to need a bigger boat. That's or something else. We need a different vehicle to actually get this going. And so this is really the call to action, the invitation to really contribute and see how we actually can do this together. We cannot do it on our own. No discipline can do it on their own. No region in the world can do this on its own. So we actually have to do this all together. And I'm so inspired to be here during these few days to actually see that we are getting together and actually starting to listen to each other and learn from each other. And we really want to continue that trip. And so IHEN will be hosting a next meeting in 2026 in Barcelona to really extend this conversation. And in the meantime, we have a lot of work to do to actually start defining these roadmaps, starting to define these guided principles that we have to actually come to a fruition of moving this initiative, the Global Human Exposome Initiative, really, really forward. And that's really the invitation. And with that, I want to thank everyone here in the room. I'm really indebted to your wisdom, your time that you're willing to spend here, and the willingness to share. And that, I think, humbles me and many of us here. And I'm really inspired to take this road trip with you. So I hope we can do that. And with that, I give it also to Gary.
No, I want to also thank the organizers, the Hopkins team. This is an amazing facility, and it was great that the university supported this. And I think we're about to start a really exciting journey. So we'll turn it back over.
So thank you, Roel. Thank you, Gary. I think there are two things that came to mind as I was listening to this. The first is it brought to mind the atlas that I have in my house, which is about this big. And the coolest thing about it, I can look at it for hours, is that you go kind of page by page, but there's this one page where it shows like the world, and then you take like this tissue paper kind of stuff, and it has more on it, and you continue to layer over and over and over, and you see the complexity build, and it just always kind of blows my mind that we know so much about how things are put together. And so I think that really resonated for me as I was listening, the complexity. The other thing that really, I think, strikes true for me in listening to this presentation and also thinking about what happened over the last few days is that there's this beautiful African proverb that goes like this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And with that, I will hand it over to Thomas and Nicole.
Yeah. And I think this is the right moment to thank Michelle for wonderful moderation. She's spent thanks a lot. And yeah, we are starting the finale of this all. And I think there's nobody better suited than one of our organizing committee members who made a fantastic career jump in the last month. Nicole Kleinstreuer, as you know, already talked to us at the very beginning. And I would like to give her the floor once again. She is now the acting NIH Deputy Director. And she is going to renew, so that everybody hears it, the commitment of NIH in moving this story forward. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks to all of you for sticking it out. It's nice to see that we still really have a critical mass in the room. I think it's been a really incredibly inspiring and thought-provoking 3 days. While I wasn't able to be here in person for as much as I would have liked, I followed most of it online. And we've heard from a very wide range of stakeholders over the last 3 days. We've had incredible participation from researchers, clinicians, data scientists, community representatives, policymakers, and each of those individuals and those groups are bringing really unique insights about what it's going to take to begin to realize the vision of the exposome. We've discussed the urgent need to capture the full spectrum of exposures across the lifespan, the importance of context, social, environmental, and biological, the importance of enabling technologies and infrastructure, and the tremendous opportunities that lie in integrating all of these insights to improve health for all of us. Now the question really for this session and for all of you to take moving forward is, how do we move from vision to action? So one example that I'd like to bring forward for you today is the NIH Real-World Data Platform. This offers us a key opportunity for building that operational backbone. It is envisioned and being designed to bring together diverse data types, clinical, environmental, behavioral, and beyond, at scale, and make them findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In short, it is one way that we can turn the ideas and the needs raised at this forum into real actionable science. Whether it's refining exposure models, identifying sensitive populations, enabling personalized prevention, or driving transformative research outcomes that can be translated into improved public health protection, the real-world data platform will be an essential part of our foundation. And its success really depends on continued collaboration across disciplines, sectors, and communities, just as we've seen on display here at this forum. So thank you again for your commitment to this effort, not just over the last few days, but moving forward together. The momentum that we've built here really must continue. Let's make the exposome an everyday part of how both NIH and the broader biomedical research community advances health. So onward and safe travels.